Hello and welcome to today's show. We're looking at 5 mirrorless cameras that you should be looking at if you're thinking about buying a camera. Let's have a look at what those are today. So I've got them up on screen. I'm going to run you through the 5 names of the cameras, and then we're going to do a side-by-side comparison to see what each camera offers you in terms of benefits. First up, it's going to have to be obviously Canon. You know I shoot Canon, I like my Canons. We've got a number of cameras today. We're looking at Sony, Canon and Panasonic, so it's not going to strictly be one brand. Canon EOS M50 Mark II mirrorless camera, a great option to get you started. It does a number of things very well. What else? We've also got another thing here. So this is a Canon full frame mirrorless camera. If you're not familiar with full frame, it basically is the size of the sensor on the cameras. A bigger sensor, more light, better optics from your camera. You get a better background blur, that kind of stuff. So I did a full video about that explaining it, so you can check out the cards for that. But let's get back to this. That's a full frame one, but at the same time we're going to look at a Panasonic Lumix G7, which is also a mirrorless camera from Panasonic. Panasonic also makes some awesome cameras, so that is another one on our list, which is number 3. Number 4, we're going to add on a Sony Alpha A6400. All the YouTubers talk about Sony Alpha, A7 III and all the fancy cameras, but don't forget the A6400, and the next camera we have got is the A6600 as well. Very good options to get you into the scene with mirrorless cameras. Nice and more lightweight, because obviously they're not as bulky as a DSLR. That is a DSLR. Without the lens on it, that is quite a big body. The mirrorless camera will be a lot smaller and thinner because there's not as much going on in the camera. They still take amazing photographs and video. So what we're going to do is let's do a side-by-side comparison of the cameras I just talked about and see what is it all about. So I've got my order slightly differently here. First up, I've got the G7 from Panasonic. It's a 2015 camera, so that's when it was released. What have we got? We have got a few options here. Yeah, so as we're looking at these cameras now, we have got the Panasonic Lumix that we just mentioned. It's released in 2015 and it's a SLR style mirrorless camera. That means you're going to have a camera that's a bit more compact and going to give you decent quality images and video. We're going to carry on looking at each camera specifically. You've already seen the summary of the cameras we're looking at, so hopefully that will help you decide if you're thinking about mirrorless. Now, looking at this, we can see there's a number of resolutions here. These numbers basically refer to how big the image will be when you take a photograph. And based on those numbers, I can roughly predict that's going to be under 20 megapixels. The camera next to it, you'll see it's a bigger number, 6,000 to 4,000. That's going to be closer to above 20, 22, 24 megapixels. So let's go down. Okay, so the Panasonic has 16 megapixels. In these types of cameras, you don't have to worry too much about the megapixel count. A lot of mobile phones brag about having 40, 80 megapixels, but remember, mobile phones tend to have a smaller sensor where they bulk and compile loads of pixels on. So that might not be the best way of doing it. With a DSLR mirrorless camera, you have a bigger sensor, and less megapixels actually mean they're bigger, which let in more light and it's a different feel. So let's carry on. So looking at that, the Lumix G7 is a 4/3 sensor type. So that's slightly bigger than a mobile phone unless you have a really fancy mobile phone. And looking down here, we can see it's got video options. Let's see what it does. Firstly, it's got a fully articulating screen, so you can spin around the screen to do like selfies and vlogging. In addition to that, you've got, I'll look at the main points. I won't look at every little spec. You've got a pop-up flash, so if you're doing photos, you'd have a bit of frill flash to make it a bit more clearer. If you take photographs, for example, a quick snapping photograph, you can take 7 photos per second. Not too shabby for like a mirrorless camera. So you're going to catch all the action that you need. In addition to that, you can take 4K at 30 frames a second video. That's pretty cool actually. And looking down that spec, that was the Panasonic that I looked at first, the G7. So that would have been this camera here, Panasonic. Obviously, it can come with detachable lenses. You can get different lenses for that different feel. So we've covered the Panasonic. I'm going to take that off my list and we're going to concentrate on the next camera. So moving along, we have now the Canon EOS M50 Mark II. Very capable camera, released in or announced in 2020. And this camera is again a mirrorless camera. It's up there in cameras, very capable. A lot of people use them for vlogging, YouTubing, I was thinking of getting that camera, but I bought something else, which is not a mirrorless camera, but I'll tell you why in a second. Or you can check my channel out. You'll see the camera I bought. You already know about this. Okay, so Mark II. Now this is a 24 megapixel camera, still perfectly adequate. This is an APS-C sensor. So this will be slightly bigger than the Panasonic camera. It's a Digic 8 processor. If you're not familiar with Digic 8, in Canon's range of cameras, it's basically the processor that handles the photo once it's taken. Things like autofocusing, making the best of high ISO. If you're not familiar with ISO, shutter speed, aperture, that's like the three key elements in photography video where you can set your settings. I did a full free, up here, I'm pointing the right way, a full free 6-episode guide about photography which teaches all of this basics to you. So make sure you check out my channel and you'll see all of that. Going back, Digic 8, and what else we got? Along the lines of that, we're looking at fully articulating screen, and we've got 10 frames a second. So if you take continuous photos, you'll get 10 photos for every second. So if you're doing sports photography or something fast paced, you won't miss that shot. In addition to that, what else have we got? We've got 4K at 24 frames a second, which is for video, and that was the Mark II. So I'm doing like a quick overview on these because we've got a few cameras to cover and I don't want to take too much of your time. So we'll do it like EOS R. This is an interesting one. 2018 SLR mirrorless camera, magnesium alloy body, which basically means it's a metal construction body, so a bit more robust. This one's got 30 megapixels. Those are probably too many megapixels, but it depends what you're doing with photos. If you're watching this video, you probably already know about megapixels and how big a photo can be stretched out basically. Are you planning to put a photograph on a billboard? If you are, you're probably not going to be watching this video because you already know about cameras. Let's have a look. Full frame. So the EOS R is a full frame camera, mirrorless camera. Looking along those lines, fully articulating screen, and let's look at the essential information. 30 frames a second in 4K and 8 frames a second continuous shooting. There are additional bells and whistles as part of that. So like there's other stuff that we'd look at, but we're covering the basics. That was the EOS R, which was this camera, close to $1,700. What else we have got? Let's get rid of that one, and then we're gonna look at the Sony's now. So Sony a6400 and a6600, we'll do both at the same time. Both released in 2019. Magnesium alloy bodies, both 24 megapixels, and the main differences here is going to be in terms of the cameras and the options for shooting. So they both do 11 frames a second. However, in video mode, you're looking at 4K at 30 frames a second, and autofocusing will be in camera body image stabilization. Let me check. Oh, those are very comparable. Very comparable. Yes, okay, so that one's got your eye focusing, which is the a6600. The a64 is an earlier model, but why is it released in the same? Is that site right? This site has never let me down. April and November. Okay, there's a difference in the release dates, the announcements. That's interesting to know. So that was the a6400, a6600. A6600 is 1300, close to 1400. And the a6400 is close to $1,298. But I'm going to do a bit more digging into that to find out exactly what the two differences are in those cameras. They look very similar. So that was a quick comparison of 5 DSLR cameras that are worth thinking about if you're thinking about mirrorless cameras. I did a whole lot more comparisons there. You can click here and check out the next video in that series. I'll see you on that next video.